All right, welcome back, guys. It's been a while. We've got the old Explore rig here, Matty from Explore Life. Dropped this fella off. I'm trying to get a few things buttoned up and sorted out so we can get out and use the thing. So let's have a quick look. Righto, so as we can see, first point of all, compound turbos. So this is actually a factory compound setup off like a Iveco Daily. So they're a Renault 3-litre diesel, very similar to the zd30. So this is actually a factory setup, which is kind of good in one way, is the sense that our high pressure turbo is sized properly, the big one's sized properly. They're all going to work nice and work really well together. The problem we are having and the problem we've run into is these turbos are designed on the standard motor to make around, I think they're like 140 kilowatts, 150 kilowatts at the crank, which rough calculations is about the same in horsepower at the wheels. For that, they use a actuator on the small turbo there. Once it starts making boosts, open up the wastegate, dumps it all into the big fella. What they use then to control boost is essentially fuel. Okay, so at 140 horsepower, this thing probably runs 32 to 1 AFRs, like just absolute minimal amount of fuel. That means the motor is super cool, super clean, no issues with EGTs, remembering that they're in a little truck, so 90% of the time you're gonna be sitting there foot flat. And that's all good. I don't really know the specs on what kind of boost they run on those Renaults. Can't seem to find out much information about them, nor can I find out much information about what these are kind of safe to run. So Matty did buy this thing a little while ago. These set up, took it out for one trip, blew the turbos up. Okay, so we got it last night, ran on the dyno at about 3,000 RPM. It was making 35 pound and just continuing to climb. Okay, so if we set this thing up super responsive and have this small turbo coming on, this thing made 35 pound at 1,700 RPM, which is big difference. So, but obviously boost was climbing, it made 40 pound by like 1,900 RPM. We had to get out of the run. So what we're gonna do, pull this turbo off, add a wastegate in here so we can control how much gas flow is coming to this big turbo. That way we can have the little turbo nice and responsive, then use the gate to control the big fella. We should have a nice winning combo. So, gonna get this thing torn apart, take it down to the boys at That's Cool Fabrication, and get a little gate put in this fella. Right, turbo's back, just been down to Benny at Dad's Fad. He has, luckily enough, had a gate on the shelf, hooked us up, welded in there, so now we have our external gate on the high pressure turbo, or low pressure turbo, sorry, atmospheric turbo. So we've got it all back in the car now. We can see she's a pretty tight fit getting that gate in there. Also pulled this front pipe off, put another boost source in there now. This way we can monitor how much total PSI we're making, so out of the high pressure turbo, and how much work the low pressure turbo is doing forcing into it. So it's all back in, just got to get the pipe work and that back on, then we'll start him back up and see how it goes. What I'm going to do now is get into removing the Steinbauer off it. So I just pulled it out, we can see it's, you know, being tuned up nice and good there. She's just cranked all the way around, you know, down is less, more is up, so she's flat out. But we're going to pull that out, get rid of all this janky wiring, just put it all back to the factory stuff. We will then get up under the dash here, have a look, see where the unit chip is, rip all that stuff out. What we're going to do then is put a bass tune in the factory ECU so that we can go in there and do our boost limits, EGR maps, throttle maps, torque limiter maps, all those kind of things to get it driving the way we want it to. We've then decided to put an Alphatec over the top That's going to give us 3 tunes select. So we'll have our base remap, which is the lowest tune it'll go, our daily kind of drive around tune, and then the bigger power tune. I don't suspect this thing's going to, break any records or do anything stupid. Personally, on our dyno, we find the limit for these cars is essentially the fuel pump. They usually tap out around that 300 horsepower mark, right? So there's a couple of cars over east here that have done, 300, 310 horsepower. That's about where they kind of max out, especially when you have them in a 4-wheel drive chassis like this on bigger tires. I think the highest one we've had was like 280, 290 horsepower. So I don't believe this is going to go crazy figures, purely because we're going to run out of pump. But what it should have is really good drivability. Should be on boost, nice and quick, make good torque down low, and try and hold that through the RPM range. So that's going to be in the main goal. But I'm going to get stuck into this thing now, rip all this junk out of it. Next time you'll see, it'll probably be back on the dyno when we start tuning it up and see what she'll do. Go. We're going to remove this, remove the Stein, and we will put a Superstorm on instead. It will essentially do everything we want. It'll do boost, throttle, rail, injector duration, the lot. So start with a nice new platform, that way we know everything's sweet, and might even do one of these old little magic. Let's see what it turns. Wait. I don't know if that's going to work. Something like that. Oof. Thank Christ. I was starting to think for a second that wasn't going to work. So there we go. Alphatec harness is wired in. Tidied up the other mess that was there. Cut everything out that wasn't needed. Got rid of all the extra bullshit. Wrapped it all back up in some nice cloth paste so this is all nice and protected. Happy days. We will get up inside there now, pull the ECU out, do our bass tune and bass changes and everything that we do in the factory ECU, and then put this fella on the rollers and see what she wants to do. Righto guys, we are back. We are on probably day 2 or 3 or something, working on the Explore Life rig. Wanted to touch base on boost control. So the last kind of couple little videos I did, we were talking about the fuel system, fueling, fuel control. We've got rid of the Steinbauer module. She's hoiked in the bin. We've pulled the uni chip out. Now, there necessarily wasn't anything wrong with the uni chip, but for these platforms, we like running the Alphatec. We are a uni chip dealer. We use uni chips on a lot of cars. 0 issues with them, no dramas whatsoever. We wanted to start with a nice fresh platform, so we knew that when we put the Alphatec in there, when we started the tuning process, if we were running into any dramas, we knew it wasn't going to be the Alphatec or anything that we'd done. It's going to be a mechanical issue or something else going on. We didn't want to go into there and start mucking around and spend hours trying to tune and muck around with the uni chip, only to be chasing our tails because someone stuffed up some wiring or something stupid's going on. So that's the kind of reason behind it. Now, I want to touch base on boost control. So I posted up a photo the other day of what this thing made. Ended up making like 200 horsepower when it first rolled in. We saw a lot of very excited comments on that post saying, 400, 500, 600 horsepower, all these kind of things. Look guys, realistically on the ZD platform, the main biggest hold up is the fuel pumps, okay? The standard fuel pumps on them can't support big power, okay? They'll make around that 300 horsepower mark, and that's, in our opinion, that's where they tap out. We've had a few go like 270, 280, 290, somewhere in that kind of window. That seems to be the, just all they have, okay? So yes, there is other ones out there making more than that. You can add a water meth kit on this thing because meth acts as a fuel in a diesel, so you can add a water meth kit, crank up the numbers, no dramas at all. There's other companies out there that are running different fuel pumps, okay? So you get different bigger pumps off bigger motors, put them onto them. Sky's the limits then, I think G-Turbo made like 400, 450 horsepower out of theirs. But that's using, a big standalone ECU and a big expensive pump, and there's not a lot of people who probably want to spend 15 grand or, 10, 15 grand getting a standalone ECU and pumps and all that kind of stuff on a ZD. So I just wanted to kind of touch base on that. The other main thing in this whole process is, yes, it's compound, yes, there's 2 turbos on there. That big turbo, although it looks reasonably large, it's not that big, okay? It's only like a 52mm compressor, which is essentially a B-stick bigger than like an 18G turbo, okay? So It's, again, that turbo's just not going to support 600 horsepower. It's just not going to make it. The other thing you need to bear in mind is this isn't a performance-based turbo setup, right? This is a factory compound setup off a 3-litre diesel that's used in a small, like medium rigid truck, okay? They're not designed to make a lot of power. They were never designed to make 500 whatever horsepower. So it's just physically not going to support it, right? So we've got a fuel pump that's not going to support it. We've got turbos that aren't going to support it. What we do have, okay, is, again, a nicely sized turbo for this motor. A very nicely sized small turbo. So this is a factory setup off a 3-litre diesel, right? So it's been sized quite well. And what it's sized for is drivability and torque, right? That's what you want in a small truck. And realistically, that's what you want in a 4-wheel drive. You want torque, you want drivability, and you want it when you want it. When you stand on the throttle, you want it there. Now on this platform, we've got larger injectors. We want to make 200, 250, 300 horsepower. We got a lot more fuel drive. Unfortunately, what that means is we have no boost control on that big turbo, right? So we've got no control on that big one. We've got a gate on the little one, nothing on the big fella, right? So if we now have a look at our dyno graphs, this is the photo I posted up on, where are we? So this is the photo I posted up on Facebook the other day. Everyone was laughing at and having a good joke out of the fact that this thing only made 200 horsepower, which, yeah, look, realistically, that's what they make when they have no fuel. Red was out, came in, okay? And we can see she was pretty rich. Sorry, I didn't get an AFR graph on the second one. It was late at night and I just wanted to run the thing up to see what it was going to do. And that's what it made. But essentially, you can see we're pretty rich down here. We're like 13s, 14s off the bottom coming up. Boost control was super slow and lazy. That gave us a slow kind of climb in our torque here. Peak power, peak figures, still much the muchness because we still made the same sort of boost. That was, the green was the exact same tune, so I had not touched the tune at all. The only difference I did on the green was we'd gone away and added the external gate onto the crossover pipe from the small turbo up to the large turbo. We then went to the gate on the small turbo and actually started adding some spring tension to make that turbo actually work, right? So the idea is little turbo comes on nice and quick. He then opens up his gate, starts bypassing. By that stage, the big turbo is on and taken over. Okay, so that is the difference there. And we can see that in our boost curve, right? So before we had we started at 10 pounds, started about the same. As the run kind of come through, you can see we've gone from 15 pound here, we're up to making 25 pound. So in that mid-range through there, we've jumped probably about 10 pound of total boost, right? And the other thing is, we can see now our boost curve come up, hold out at about 33 pound, and then taper off in the top end, which is exactly what we wanted. This one here, we can see he's coming up and he's climbing. No real sign of stopping, okay? No real sign of slowing down. It was just gonna keep going and do whatever it wants because there was zero boost control, right? So now what we can do, we can have that little turbo coming on nice and strong, bypass to the big fella, and then use the external gate to control that. I think that's about it, essentially. So for the boost control side of it, get rid of these runs and we'll start going through the actual tuning process and what we did. Okay, so from here now, we went into the factory ECU, we made some changes inside there. It had never been tuned before, so this vehicle did not have a actual remap in the ECU. It literally just had the modules kind of just slapped on over the top. So we went into the factory ECU, made some changes in there. This essentially gives us the ability to have 3 tunes select, okay? So the Alpha Tech has 2 tunes, 1 and 2, and then 0, which is off. So now essentially what we have is 3 tunes. So we've given Matty what we would call as like a heavy toe, all right? So it is super, super mild, super, super soft, bugger all fuel, bugger all boost, whatever. You can see our boost curve still starting off much nicer because of our gate and boost control, but our AFRs are starting at 20-1, going up to like 28, coming back down to like 25, okay? With a peak of like 30 pound, 185 horsepower, virtually making 400 newton meters flat pretty much the whole way across the rev range. So that is just a nice tune that if he's up the beach and he's got a big whatever behind and he's beating the living piss out of this thing on a 40-degree day and super hot, it'll do that all day, every day without even breaking a sweat, right? So yay, boring. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Righto, so this is what we would call our daily kind of tune, right? So this is where we're kind of getting after it. Not really, still a bit mild. Starting off, again, boost curve's much nicer. This is bringing our torque up a lot higher, even though we're starting off at the same sort of AFRs as it was before. You can see down here, same sort of AFRs that the previous tune was. Because that boost is coming on, it's cleaning up nice and quick. So by 1800, we've got what, 25, nearly 30 pound, 20 to 1, 22 to 1, rolling out the door 20 to 1, just kind of tags into that 19 to 1 at the very top end there. Still giving us a nice kind of flat. We're starting, look, 1400 RPM, we're making 400 Newton meters. Comes up, holds that above 500 Newton meters pretty much the entire way. So from 1700 RPM all the way to, what's that, 3600 RPM, we have pretty much 500 Newton meters flat and a peak power of about 245. So that's the kind of tune that this thing can sit on day in, day out, drive around, do whatever we want. You could tow on this tune, it's pretty clean, it's pretty reasonable, it's nothing crazy on boost, you know, 33, 34 pound at peak. That's kind of his all-round daily. So that's the kind of tune I'd expect he's gonna be ripping around on most of the time. So not too bad. Right, so now we have what we would call the power tune, right? So this one's where we're getting after it a bit, and as we kind of suspected, rolled around that 290 horsepower, right? 289.6, and as I wouldn't even know my maths teacher's name because I can't remember maths, but he told me always round up, never go back. So we're gonna call it 290. 290 horsepower at peak, about 37 pounds, so a bit more than we kind of wanted, but with more fuel, we had a bit more boost drive, and she got up there a little bit. I did actually end up slowing the turbo down a smidge because this thing was trying to make nearly 700 Newton meters at like 1700 RPM. So it did actually go back and try and slow that turbo down. So on the daily and on this tune, now that we had better fuel control and better boost control, the thing was trying to make like 700 Newton meters at like 1700 RPM. Now, anyone that kind of knows, well, anything really, not even diesels, but just general motors and performance, they know that when you're making peak torque, you are making peak cylinder pressure. So we didn't exactly want to lift the head on this thing straight away. Apparently, we've been told that this turbo setup has been on this car for a long time, running at like 35, 40 pound. And that's great when it's making 40 pound right at 3,500 RPM. If we're making 40 pound or 35 pound at 1700 RPM, cylinder pressure in there is going to be way higher because we're going to have a heap more torque, heap more compression, a lot more boost down low. Okay, so what we wanted to do was try and slow that turbo down so it didn't come on way too quick, just give us a smooth kind of torque curve. Right, and that's kind of what we've achieved, right? So bear in mind, this is only 2000 RPM here, so it's still coming on nice and strong, and we are still starting the run at what, 1450? We're making just under 500 Newton meters. So at 1500 RPM, we have 500 Newton meters, 600 Newton meters by 1650, touch over 700 Newton meters by 2000 RPM. So pretty respectable. Again, nice, big, wide torque curve. Like, let's have a look at the average torque this thing's making, okay? So from 1500 RPM all the way to 3600 RPM, it never gets below 500 Newton meters. Right, so the entire time it's making over 500 Newton meters, which is pretty good for a little 3-litre diesel, right? So bearing in mind again, that turbo is not much bigger than an 18G, 290 horsepower, 700 Newton meters for that wide of a span. There's many TDs out there that would love to make 290 horsepower on an 18G with a nice wide torque curve, right? So remember, you're gonna see those things come up, have a peak, and then it's gonna drop. If you talk about their average torque that it's making across the RPM, it might only be like 300 Newton meters. Yes, they might make 700 Newton meters here, but at the end of the run, they're probably making 300. This thing's starting at, 500, 600, and it's making it the entire way across the curve. So this thing is gonna drive absolutely amazing with that amount of torque for the entire curve. Yes, 500 horsepower would be sweet, and yeah, 1,000 Newton meters would be sweet, but come on, let's be realistic. It's a stock zd30 with a few 100,000 Ks, unknown injectors. Yeah, I think that's pretty realistic and pretty good figures overall. Okay, so while we're on this subject, I wanted to just kind of delve a little bit more into the whole average power and average torque, right? So I want to do a little comparison. So the red run is where we finished up with the ZD30. The green run is a 277, 280 horsepower TD42, right? So this particular TD42 had a DC6 pump, GTX 3071, big manifold, big front mount, big airbox, all the usual goodies. Now, if we look at average power and average torque, ZD hoses it, okay? So admittedly, the GD3071 isn't the most responsive turbo in the world, but it is still on song by, 2200. It's making its peak torque. There's turbos out there that are going to be a little bit more responsive, say 1900 at peak torque. But regardless, on this dyno on this particular day, it made around that 650, 700 newton meter mark, 280 horsepower. But we can see the compound setup on the ZD30 hosing it in terms of drivable torque. And that is what these motors get beaten up for. Righto, next one. My boy Andrew Keeler, he's going to love this because he just sold his Patrol for a 200 series. So this is a virtually stock DPF model 200 series, right? So twin system, straight through exhaust, twin threes out to a 4-inch dump, converter lockup kit installed. This was after we did a tune on it for him, so it come in at about 247. Now, look, granted, yes, the 200 series, of course, is going to tow nicer than this thing. The auto is going to be better, all that kind of thing. We're not worried about comparing cars for cars here. We want to look at, again, average power, average torque. Now, again, granted, this thing's got aftermarket turbos, aftermarket injectors, blah, 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 blah. But all I'm trying to, put across in this little segment here is that the drivability of this thing is going to actually be a lot better than people are thinking and expecting, okay? And this is kind of helping to show that, right? So, sorry, this isn't the locked run. This is an unlocked run because there's the converter there. So this is an unlocked run in a 200 series, right? So yes, the 200 series makes a bit more torque down low. Then the whole way across the board, ZD30 making more torque, making more power, okay? Not a super fair comparison, but what I will do now is try and find the locked run for the 200 series, and we'll see how the big V8 responds with the factory twin turbos versus the ZD30 with the twin turbos. Righto, so there it is. Here is the locked run on that 2016 VDJ Land Cruiser. So again, not a hugely modified vehicle, just a full twin system, airbox, snorkel, all the usual goodies on our dyno, which is a 2-wheel drive dyno. So we're obviously taking the front shaft out to run it. They usually come around that 250 horsepower mark, okay? So yes, it's not fair because obviously the ZD is making more peak power. So it's not a true kind of comparison, but it gives you a good idea of just how good this little ZD combo actually works and will drive. Again, look at the torque difference down low here, okay? So average torque, average power, this compound ZD30 is absolutely hosing in your average 200 series, right? So response down low, again, everything, dusting it. So now the next one we'll have a look at, I think, is a VDJ with an upgraded turbo and a set of 30s, and we'll see kind of where it lands against that kind of a vehicle. Again, not ragging Andrews, 200 series, the thing's gorgeous, and it, hands down, it's gonna tow and drive a lot nicer than Matty's bucket of bolts here. But again, that is your average, okay? This is what we're trying to get across, that comparing it to a 200 series, this thing's making more power and more torque across the whole board. Okay, so this is a good one. Oop, drop me pointer. Right, so this is a good one. So this was a 76 series cruiser with a set of plus 30s and a Garrett Power Max upgrade turbo. So the Power Max is essentially a direct bolt-on turbo. It has Garrett's new G30, G-style compressor and turbine wheels. A little bit bigger, a little bit larger shaft, can run a bit more boost. So this one was running around 25 pound of boost. Otherwise, everything else is virtually standard, just clutch, exhaust, stock intercooler. Had an airbox, snorkel, basic kind of things. But very, very good comparison, right? So very similar in terms of peak power. ZD30 did just edge it out a little bit. But then when we come back here at peak torque, the VDJ with some 30s and a good turbo did edge it out. But look at that comparison, okay? It's really quite impressive when you consider that both these vehicles have upgraded turbos, both these vehicles have plus 30 injectors. ZD30 is a 3-litre diesel, the VDJ is a 4.5-litre diesel, so a 50% larger capacity, okay? 50% larger motor. right? Look at that. zd30 edges it out a little bit in torque down low. VDJ comes over the top. Then from about 2500 up to about 3, they're almost identical. Like you would argue and say that is the exact same power and torque they roll through. Then the zd30 just carries it that little bit more out the top end before we start pulling fuel. Whereas the VDJ kind of lays over at about 3200 and we're pulling fuel out of it. So very, very interesting, guys. How the little 3-litre zd30 with a compound setup, just how much torque and how much drivability this thing has, okay? So a lot of people can probably compare to what the VDJs drive like once they're tuned and making some reasonable power, you know, just under 300 horsepower. This little 3-litre is doing virtually the exact same. Killer little combo, great little set of compounds, really works quite well on this setup. Very impressive all in all. So really cool to see that kind of a comparison there and see just how much drivability these compounds add. So if you like the video, sorry it's pretty short and kind of jumbled around. Like I said, we did this over about 3 different days. This was all after hours. It's now Sunday, I think. Sunday afternoon. Trying to get this thing done because we know next week we will just not have time, and Matty's hoping to, I think he's flying back in a couple of days to get this thing back. So if you like the video, give us a like, share, comment. Got any questions, hit us up. We try to get back to most of the comments and most of the questions in these videos. I'm sorry if there's something I said didn't really make sense, or I'm jumbling back and forth and I've repeated things 10 times. My apologies. Like I said, we've done this video over like 3-4 days, after hours, so on and so on. So we're just trying to get something out there for you guys to watch and give you a bit more of a background and information on this car and what went into it. Not just looking at a dyno figure and thinking, well, that's pretty shit, only made 290 horsepower. Like I said, look at average power, average torque. When you look at that compound setup, big win, pretty impressive. Thing drives amazing. I'm sure Matty's gonna give this thing an absolute hiding, and we look forward to seeing what he can do with it. Cheers, guys.